So I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. I wanted to take some time for us to discuss the topic of parenthood. My wife Elena and I have been married for about 3 years, and as you may know, we just gave birth to our first little girl about 8 months ago, Clara. This is a new stage of life for us, one that obviously we've never taken on. Being a parent, as I'm sure you already know, comes with a whole array of challenges and things that you've never faced before. It can be a daunting situation to find yourself in at the age of 25 like me. However, I and others can find comfort and direction in the Word of God. My wife and I both grew up going to church. We've heard sermons and Bible classes and things talking about being a good parent or being a good kid, whatever that may be, but that's just it. My knowledge and our knowledge of parenting is entirely theoretical. We've never done it before. This is our first time. It's something that Bible study and the leadership and example of my parents have taught me about and attempted to prepare me for, but it's still something I've never done until Clara got here. I believe that experience often yields a wisdom that reading and studying don't often bring. It's not that I believe any of your knowledge or experience can provide better wisdom than that of the Bible. The Bible is the standard. God's Word is the standard, of course. However, you've seen the challenges and you've seen the success of implementing biblical parenting or the biblical approach to parenting in your lives. And I think hearing about that is something that people like Elena and I, young parents and old parents as well, could benefit from. So tonight I wanted to lead a discussion on parenting. I want to discuss the biblical insights that God has given us about parenthood. And I want us to be able to talk about and draw from the text and talk about what God's will is for our lives as parents. But I'd like all of you as well to draw on your experience and use your experience to enrich our discussion and bring what you have to offer. I would like to hear your thoughts on scriptures or maybe your stories or experiences and implementing them in your family. Any advice you may have to young parents like Elena and myself so that we can raise our children in the way that God would want us to. We're going to talk about a variety of topics, but before we get into them, I'd like for you guys to introduce yourselves. So could you tell us a little bit about yourselves, Chris?
Yeah, we're Chris and Laurie Tarver. Been married 22 years, and we have two boys, aged 13 and 15. Will and Clay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kyle?
So Kyle and Bridget Slayball, we've been married for almost 24 years now. We have 6 kids. Our oldest is 21, Riley. We've got a 19-year-old Braden. A 17-year-old Mackenzie. We've got a 11-year-old Addison, 9-year-old Logan, and a 6-year-old Harper.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We got a variety of topics to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. Talking to your kids about God is something that's obviously very important. Our goal as Christians is to live lives for God and for Christ, so obviously we would want our kids to do the same thing. But sadly, I think a lot of people struggle with this, especially early on in their kids' lives. Proverbs 22:6 tells us to train a child in the way he should go, but it doesn't say what age to start that. I know plenty of people who have young kids say that their kids are still too young, or it's too early for them to start learning anything. But I'm not sure if that's true. When should you start talking to your kids about God, and why that age?
Well, as I think about that, I think about Timothy, just because he's such a good example of someone that, the Bible tells us that from his youth or from childhood, he'd known the Holy Scriptures. And so when I think about training up my own kids, I don't know exactly the method that Timothy's mom and grandma took in teaching him the truth. I know that they were certainly instrumental in making it happen, but from childhood, I assume that was from the time he was a baby that he was hearing and observing at least his mother and grandmother in learning about God's Word and understanding it. And that resulted in his case with a lifelong commitment to God, it would seem.
Yeah, yeah, I think Timothy's a great example.
Yeah, I would say there's not an age that's too young. Even when they're babies, you can sing to them, sing Bible songs to them. They register on that. They pick up on that as they get older. They learn the songs. They memorize them. Any and every opportunity. in my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean that proposes the question that I think a lot of people have: can a child be too young to hear about God?
I would say no, personally. I mean, if it doesn't register with them at the time, it doesn't register. But there will always come a point in time where it will register.
Yeah, yeah. And, I noticed in Psalm 22, David writes in verse 9 and 10 about God being his from his mother's womb. Obviously he wasn't on the day of his birth praising God, but it's that idea that from the very beginning of his life, God was what his life was about. And obviously, for it to start that young, it would rely on us as parents to do that, because kids at that young of an age can't do it on their own. It would rely on us to do that.
I think of it like, is a child too young to learn to eat? It's just a natural thing. They have a craving for food, and they learn to eat different types of food as they grow older. Well, they have a yearning for knowledge too, and they learn things whether we teach them or not. They learn things. So if we're talking to them about God from the very beginning, they're going to gradually develop an ability to understand more and more deeper things about God. But it's not about necessarily having a curriculum that is for every kid. It's just about giving them the things they need.
Yeah, I think it's really clear, from what we've said and what we see in the Bible, that there's really not an age that's too early to start talking about God. But I think what you'd have to consider next would be, how do you do that? Obviously little kids, they're somewhat restricted on the way that they can learn or what they can learn at such an early age. So what kind of methods do you use early in your kids' lives?
We did, when the boys were little, they hated having their diapers changed. That was like the worst thing that you could do, is change their diaper. So we would change their diaper and sing the books of the Bible to them. And it would distract them, and they started learning them. And they actually ended up memorizing them that way, because we'd always change the diapers while we were, they'd sit still while we sang those songs. And then when they were real little, before even age 1, we used the Beginner's Bible. I know a lot of Christian parents use this, and you can see how much we've used it because it was brand new. And these are good biblical stories. They're all Bible-based. There's no untruths in them. It's a great starter book. Boys loved it. They're still looking at it to this day. And then as they grew older, we got into these. These are Mrs. Lee books. She only wrote 2 before she passed, but these are real good books too, all biblically based. They're real short lessons, and she asks questions at the end. So this is great when they turn a little bit older, like 4 or 5. You can start. We started even before that.
Yeah.
I think 3, we would adjust the questions, and it was like a good family, like devotional kind of thing. And then as they got a little bit older, then we also worked on these, and these are Happy Day books, and there's so many of these. There's like 50 of them, but they're really good too, and for the most part, they're very accurate. And so I think these are great tools to use before you. Not saying you can't start reading the Bible to them, but at an early age, they can only comprehend the language so much that these are good tools to use when they're real little.
We use the same book. It was just one. You see parents are all worried about teaching their kids colors and numbers and ABCs. Well, if you can start them learning that at such a little young age, why can't you read, Bible story books? And that's what we always did. And as they got older, they had certain ones that they wanted to read all the time. And then, of course, they had it memorized, but before long, they're reading it to you. From memory, but, and it's short, it's simple, but it gets the main point across. And then as they got older, you add a little bit more, more from the Bible, more information from those stories. So.
Well, even with Clara, we read her a bedtime story, the same one, every night before she goes to sleep, and she recognizes it already at 8 months old. Like, we read it to her, and when we start reading the sentence, she's like, she gets all happy and excited. So I feel like if we start reading those books, maybe it'll click with her too.
And the children, it's amazing. People don't think they can memorize as quickly as they can, but both our boys knew Psalm 23 before the age of 2, and we have it on video. And it was constant repetition. We would say it, and they would say it back. And it's a cute little video now, watching them say Psalm 23, and they can barely say the words. But they can memorize Psalm 23. They can memorize the books of the Bible. They can memorize those things at a very early age. And I think we discredit them by not starting them early enough.
I saw that, the congregation I went to growing up had something called Bible drill. I know we do the same thing at West Main, and it's always astounding to see the things that those kids can talk about and things they can say. I mean, I've heard little kids as young as 1 or 2 years old saying the books of the Bible or the 12 sons of Jacob. Even I've heard some kids with the kings of Judah, the kings of Israel, names that I don't even know. It's just astounding that kids learn things. Kids will retain things if you'll just share it with them. Something that I thought about that I think is really important for kids, maybe not so much a method, but a characteristic of our methods, would be consistency. Kyle talked about your kids developing the need for food when they're younger. Me as a father, I provide food for my family. It's not something I can do occasionally or just times when I feel like it or times when it's convenient. It's something it's a consistent flow of nourishment that I have to provide for my family, and the same would need to be true of spiritual things as well. In Deuteronomy 6:7, it says to diligently teach your sons when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. It's something that should be a part of our daily routine, something that's consistently being fed to our children, the spiritual things.
I was thinking of that passage as well, because one of the things that passage refers to that I don't know that I always understood this as we were raising our kids so much, but I saw other people doing it and tried to imitate it. But it's not just reading the Bible and reading storybooks. Those are very, very important. They are critical. But also it says, and this is related to the children of Israel, that they were to read God's law. They were to teach their children God's law. And then it says, you shall talk of them while you sit in your house. The idea is that it's a part of our conversation. I'm talking about God. I'm talking about the things I see around me and how God created them and controls these things, and just the acknowledgement of who God is, and He's the basis of all the things we observe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important to note, as kids get older, their ability to understand grows, their maturity, they gain maturity, their attention span lengthens, their personalities develop, and as this happens, the way we interact with our kids changes as well. So does this change the way we interact with our kids as far as our discussions with God? How do these methods change, the methods that we use to talk to our kids about God? How do they change as they get older?
We start, as they get older, they start having Bible lessons to do, hopefully, if you're taking them to Bible class. So a good start would be to do their Bible lessons with them and make sure they're understanding what they're doing, making sure they answer all the questions. And then as they age, ours are both in the high school class now, but, we're not doing their lessons with them, but we're making sure they're getting their lessons done.
Mm-hmm.
So, as their maturity grows, we expect the responsibility to grow.
Yeah.
So those type methods, and they're old enough to read their Bible on their own and can study those things, but yet we're going to study with them as well,
At different ages, obviously you talk to your children different ways about God, right? So when they were younger, we loved the outdoors. I'd take opportunities, with animals and things like that. Most kids like animals. We'd be sitting in a duck blind. I'd say, do you know how these ducks got here to Central Texas from the middle of nowhere, Canada or Alaska? They go, no, I don't, Daddy. I said, well, God put an electromagnetic field inside of their head, and they can read the electromagnetic poles on the earth. That stuff. It doesn't happen by accident, right? And kids can grasp that. They can pick up on things like that.
It's cool.
Well, as they get older too, they have questions that lead you down the direction that they're interested in, or the things that they're not understanding. So it just a lot of times it's them. You look to them to find out where they are at and go from there.
I think that prime time after school is a great opportunity, if you have that opportunity to, I would, when the boys were in elementary school, I would always walk them home from school. And it was a great opportunity to talk about a lot of these things, about what they saw at school or concepts about God and the questions they'd come up with. Like Bridget said, you never know what's coming, but they've had all these discussions or been introduced topics at school that's going to spur the questions. And you've got that precious time that there's no other distractions. You know, if you can get that in the car or on a walk or, you know, one-on-one as much as possible, that really helps, I think.
Yes, we've talked about methods. I think something important as well would be topics. I think it goes without saying that there are certain biblical topics that we don't talk to our kids about until they're older, for reasons of both difficulty of understanding, like types and antitypes, or whether a topic is age appropriate, like sexual relations. At some point, we must move past just Bible stories and Bible characters and move into more advanced themes, topics, and teachings. But when do you know that your kids are ready for those types of things?
I think a lot of it has to do with what they're going through at school, what they're hearing at school, questions they ask. I think that's one of the main reasons it's so important to keep like an open line of communication with your kids. We let our kids tell us anything.
Mm-hmm.
Some parents may have a tendency to shy away from talking about certain subjects or avoid it. You know, we encourage our kids, if they have a concern or they heard something at school, you know, to talk to us about it. And I think you can base when's the right time to talk about certain subjects based on what they're experiencing, you know, in their lives, what they're telling you. You know, hey, so-and-so said this, or why is so-and-so doing this? You know, that's kind of the cues we usually use.
I also think about, you know, I just reflect back on my youth a lot of times and thinking about the things that maybe I wish somebody would have been talking to me about when I was 10 years old or 12 years old or 14 years old. And it's kind of hard to do as a parent, at least it is for me, because, you know, my 12-year-old or almost 12-year-old seems like she should be 3 still. So you lose track of time, you lose track of things, but part of the process of sitting down with your kids every day and reading and studying and then asking them what do they think about it is you start thinking about, you know, what are they saying, what age are they, what was I thinking when I was their age? Maybe I need to bring that up, you know?
A lot of it depends on what they've been exposed to. If you allow your kids to have free reign on the internet, free reign on TV, free reign on letting them spend time with whoever they want to spend time with, they're going to be exposed to a lot more things early on than a child who, you know, their parents filter what they're watching. Their parents filter who they're, you know, what they're doing on the internet and who they're spending time with. It makes a big difference. So you kind of have to gauge it that way too, you know.
As Christians, something that's very important for our kids would be for them to also want to become Christians. You know, as they get older and we continue having these discussions about God and about spiritual things, we would hope that they would decide to take these things on as well and take on the lifestyle of a Christian. And that would obviously mean that they would need to take on Christ through baptism. How can we be sure that our kids are on the path to do this? And how do we have conversations with them about their need to take this step?
That's a tough one in some ways because you just don't, you know, at least for us, I've always thought I don't want to push my kids to do something and that they're not committing themselves to, you know. They've got to be old enough to make a commitment. They've got to be old enough to recognize that there's something in their life that needs to change or be corrected and that they are accountable to God. I think of Proverbs 20 and verse 11 says, even a child is known by his deeds, whether he does is pure and right. You know, as I read that, I think that my own children have a reputation. They're recognized by their actions, and some of those actions that they do are just because mom and dad told them this is the right way to do, and that's okay. But then they reach a point at which their motivation is not just mom and dad are going to be upset if I don't do this. Their motivation becomes, I realize that I have a relationship with God that I need to be concerned about. And so I think the way I've started to recognize that with my kids is that there's an age at which they start questioning. There's an age at which they start doubting, and they start asking about heaven, and they start asking about, you know, what is it mean? You know, and once they have that concept that there's something greater than themselves and that they're accountable, then you really, as a parent, I think, have a responsibility to share with them what God's Word says about that relationship and how to make it right.
Yeah, I agree with Kyle. I mean, the last thing you want to do is pressure a child or put any pressure on them for something like that, because it's got to be their decision. They have to be at a mental level and a maturity level, you know, to make that decision. And every child's different. And every child's different. But what we do is we read the Bible as a family, and it kind of comes up naturally in the scriptures. We talk about why certain things are important. You know, why is baptism important? What's the purpose of it? You know, to wash away our sins. And I think as children continue to study and they see these things, there just comes a point where it clicks with them. And you know when it does. I mean, you can tell. You can tell. So.
Something Elena and I have talked about is, again, getting back to that idea of consistency. That, you know, if we are talking to our kids enough, like Deuteronomy 6 said, when you sit, when you walk, when you lie, when you rise, if we're doing this enough, spiritual conversation can become natural between us and our kids. Our kids will feel comfortable talking about these things, and it'll become a part of our natural dialogue that, you know, hey, we're moving towards a goal, and we're doing this as a family, and there's a big step to be taken at some point. And help our kids feel comfortable talking to us about those sorts of things. I think is really important.
And at some point, you know, most kids, I know we experienced this. Some kids have a curiosity about baptism, and they may ask questions about it, but that may not necessarily mean they're ready to obey the gospel. It may just be curious. And so asking them questions, Kyle talked about that, talking to your children, asking questions, that's where you can figure out, okay, is it a curiosity or is their conscience pricked? And so we had that situation where there was a curiosity early on, but we knew he wasn't ready. And it was just more questions. And then when we asked questions back, it wasn't necessarily the answers that, you know, would indicate he was ready to be baptized. So then the topic got brought up a few years later, and then you see a difference, because then the conscience was pricked. There was a fear of not having that relationship change with the Lord, a fear of what's going to happen if I'm not baptized. And so then we knew he was ready. We studied the scriptures. He was baptized that night. And one of the most wonderful suggestions we got was from Elena's parents, because they were there when Will was baptized. And they had recommended him going home and writing a letter to himself of why he obeyed the gospel. And we had him do that. And that was a very wise advice, I thought, because then later, if a child wonders, well, did I do it for the right reason? They can go back and read what they wrote to themselves on, oh, this is why I was baptized, you know? And so I thought that was really smart and wise to do.
Yep.
Thank you guys for your input on that topic. It was a great discussion. I really got a lot of the things that you had to say. So we'll go ahead and wrap up this discussion, and we'll move on to our next one. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page for notifications about more content like this.